There we go.
Hi, this is Quinn with SF Indie Fest, and I am here with the filmmakers of To Die Alone. We have Austin Smagalski, who directed the film, and I believe, what were your other roles on the film, Austin?
I wrote and directed,
Yeah,
did some producing, all that deal. So
amazing. And then, of course, our two stars, Lisa Starrett and James Tang. Welcome to you both.
Hello,
Uh,
hello.
yeah. Um, so, yeah, looking forward to getting into it here. I guess the first question for Austin is just how you kind of came to become interested in this topic, and do you have any kind of personal experience with backpacking? Have you ever been similarly kind of like lost in the woods, and can you just kind of tell me a little bit about what drew you to this?
yeah, so I actually grew up backpacking. I was in Boy Scouts, and so like every summer you were doing 50-mile backpacking trips, or like one year I did a 75. And there was actually a 50-mile backpacking trip I went on. I don't think I've shared this story with you guys,
Mhm.
but there was a 50-mile backpacking trip I went on that the first night, I won't get into the details, but my foot got infected, and the next morning it was swollen up and I could not walk.
Oh my God.
And so, yeah, I fortunately, I was with a group of people, like my parents were there, and, like I had a friend fashion me a little crutch, and we managed to work our way out of the woods. It was like 8 miles, we were fine.
Oh,
But that sort of feeling of being injured out there and looking around and being like, what if I didn't have all of these people? That was definitely a um, sort of an origin of this.
wow.
Oh, you're muted, Quinn.
We've lost you, Quinn.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a harrowing experience to be kind of back there and realize like, oh, this is the stakes are really high all of a sudden, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so Lisa, I was kind of curious about like in preparing for this role and thinking about how you were going to approach it. There's like so much of it is just kind of about your like interior life in your past.
Mm,
And and you're kind of having to kind of carry also with the way that you're like presenting to this ostensibly a stranger, right? Uh
mm.
in um in James's character. And so I was curious about like some of the choices that you were making in doing that, and how you were kind of approaching the role uh of this Irving, and can you just kind of talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So there was a lot of conversations between me and Austin and James, about their relationship and also Irving's past because I do share a lot of similarities with Irving, some of her traumas, and so I did bring a lot of my personal experiences into Irving's character, but I also very much wanted her to be her own person as well. So there was a lot of exploration, a lot of conversations around fleshing her out as her own unique human being.
And James, like your character to me is like he seems so kind of approachable, and and kind of like this almost like this angelic presence at first, but then there's also a sense of kind of menace as
Hmm.
well, you know um in the way that it's done. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that and some of the nuances in the character that were kind of asked of you in the script, and how you kind of
Hmm.
approached it.
Are we doing spoilers? I've assumed people have watched it already after.
Yeah, I mean,
This
the
plays
assumption,
afterwards,
yeah,
right?
the
Yeah.
assumption is
Yeah,
this will
okay.
play afterward.
Let's watch the Q&A before we watch the movie.
It's a good
Um,
question.
yeah. Yeah, because like Austin had told me, yeah, that kind of Ford is this sort of guide character, but then yeah, because essentially this version of Ford exists only in Irving's mind. So it's like, when like the darkness kind of mixes in, it's really like from other sources as
Mhm.
like a sort of reflection of that. Um, and it was, yeah, just trying to get there almost not even as Ford, but as that kind of reflection of the character played by other James. Um, Yeah, so that took a bit of work. That was there was a little rehearsal that Lisa and I had that she was like being very polite, but it was really like I just wasn't there yet, emotionally. And like once we got there, she's like, no, no, yeah, this is it. I was like, okay, cool. That was all on me.
Yeah,
Let's
I have to
move
give
on from
both of
there.
them a lot of credit for trusting me too, because like those scenes in the moment sometimes don't quite make like the logic of them doesn't quite make sense when you're in person and just trying to justify. Like, we had the scene where James gets really upset about the fact that Irving's drinking alcohol. Um, and like in the moment, we were having a tough time making sure that that intensity was justified. But then once it's all cut together and you're seeing these little flashes of her trauma and how his performance is very clearly being amplified because he's reflecting that, it comes together and the scene actually works really, really well. But yeah, so you guys were fantastic about being willing to go to those places. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, and Austin, can you kind of tell me a little bit about how you kind of came to work with James and Lisa, and just about kind of the origins of what you saw as these characters and the things that you knew would be asked of the actors, and how you all kind of came to work together. And then if any of you can kind of just talk about a little bit of that process of kind of beginning to kind of get the kind of chemistry right.
Yeah, absolutely. So on casting and projects in the past, I've tended to just kind of bring in friends of friends and, make stuff sort of small scale. And on this one, because it was going to be two characters in the woods, I knew that the chemistry, the dynamic had to be absolutely perfect. Because if it wasn't, the whole movie doesn't really work. And so we did a pretty elaborate casting process. We did open calls. We had something like 500 to 600 initial people submit and then narrow it down, tapes, all that deal. And James was a friend of a friend who I'd known of for a little while. I actually had him come in for an early table read. And at that table read, I was like, I think it's him. Like we had a lot of other people come in, but like I I needed somebody who was going to be playing this guide character who's trying to help Irving move towards what he thinks she needs. And the whole turn of him realizing that Nori's still alive, what he realizes she needs changes, which is why we end up going back to the lake. And so I needed somebody who was going to be able to be approachable up front, who was going to be able to try and convince, like, hey, let's go together. Maybe I can help guide you here. But could also embody the turbulent emotions that Irving was experiencing, because those are really reflected in the environment, literally the rain, which we can get into later, and, the snow, and everything sort of is reflecting that inner turmoil she's having. And then for Irving, um, I needed somebody who was gonna be able to hold a, it's hard to express, who's going to be able to hold that trauma even in the moments where it wasn't about that. Like you could feel the weight that that person was carrying throughout the whole process. So obviously, so much of this is a survival story on like a physical level, but it's also an emotional survival story. And I needed somebody who could embody that in every scene. And when Lisa came in we did in-person casting and we did chemistry sessions where we paired different people together to see, what was going to work best. Lisa came in and asked me about a scene and said, hey, so this is actually referring to this like super deep emotional conflict she's having, right? And it was just an off line that I'd written that didn't really mean a lot. And she was already reading into the character. She was already seeing how that internal turmoil was going to express itself. And it was just, that was a moment I was like, okay, yeah, no, it's her, 100%. And so the two of them together, it was also really important to me that like there could be a platonic relationship, because so many of these you would feel like it would kind of automatically go to romantic. Obviously, because of the reveal of the film of Irving being lesbian, that wouldn't work anyways. But I just wanted the two of them to be able to have a really intense connection while it was still platonic and not romantic. So that was really important to me as well.
And yeah, James and Lisa, can you kind of talk about that process of finding the kind of chemistry in your relationship with each other, and kind of what that journey kind of looked like by the when you first read the script and to where it ended up?
Hmm.
After you, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, James. As far as building that friendship, fun fact, James and I are very close friends now, which is
Oh, no
exciting.
kidding.
Um, and so in films I've done before where the character has a lot of trauma, sometimes I haven't gotten to meet my co-stars before we're like on set filming. And if it's someone who's abusing me, I did not want to interact with that actor whatsoever. And they're trying to be very friendly, they're very lovely. But I'm in that place of trauma and fear, and I'm like, I want nothing to do with you. And I really didn't want that with James. So before we started day one of rehearsals, we just met up for coffee and just talked and got to know each other as people before we were thrown into our characters. And that was really great. And then the rehearsal process, and Austin sent a lot of really wonderful concept films to kind of understand feelings for the film. And so James and I would have like movie nights to watch these together and talk about them and talk about how our characters could incorporate some of those ideas. And so it was a really nice process of genuinely becoming friends as our characters were becoming friends in the filming process. Um, and then as far as reading the script, from day one that I read the synopsis of this story on LA Casting for the open call, I immediately fell in love with Irving and was like, this is one of the most beautiful characters I've ever looked at. And within the hour had already filmed one of the monologues for the audition. And yeah, so I care very deeply for her and her story. And it was a lot of fun watching the transition happen from day one, who I think she is and who I think is going to happen, and then reading the full script and being like, oh, I did not see so much of this coming, and to finally seeing it for the very first time. So what about you, James?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa is so emotionally available as an actor and a person as well. And very friendly too. Yeah, so it was, just easy to be like, I want to keep you alive.
Can you kind of speak to that idea of influences? And Lisa, you mentioned that you were looking at a bunch of different kinds of films, but can you all talk about some of the kind of influences you were bringing to this, and whether it be like stylistically or from dynamics and relationships and other films that you've seen? Can you kind of speak to what you saw as some of your influences during the making and preparation for this film?
The list. So yeah, I for this one I decided to put together a list of like 10 different movies. And I every film project I ever do, I also start with a playlist. That's generally developed while I'm writing, and then I share that with everybody very early on in the process, because music and mood and tone are super important to me. But as far as the actual films that we referenced, I sent out a list of about 10 movies for everyone to take a look at, and each one kind of had its own pieces and parts for people to reference. So, like the movie Adrift. I really like Adrift. It's lighter fare than this in most places, but it's a survival film where, and I'll spoil the 2016, 2017 movie Adrift, where basically this couple is sailing across the Pacific Ocean, and the guy dies very early on, but then kind of comes back, and you're debating whether or not he's alive. And it's really about her survival and leaning on somebody without them like taking over and just saying, okay, I'm going to pick you up and carry you, and that's it. It was about the strength that one person can lend to another that can help them survive. that isn't, because I didn't want, James to just run in like a hero, kind of grab her and go. It was really about this emotional survival concept that we keep coming back to. And so there were a couple of different movies, but that was one of my favorites on that list.
And can you kind of speak to choosing locations and what your approach was to that? And what part of the Sierras were you filming in?
So we filmed for 11 days in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. And so we filmed a good chunk of this is shot on sections of the PCT that are around there. So we shot a good chunk around Gumboot Lake, which is right off the PCT. And then we shot the big snow scene happens in the shadow of Mount Shasta. That's Mount Shasta up in the background. And we wanted to make sure that we could, really make this a film that felt like it was in the middle of nowhere, while also, we shot this entire movie in 13 days, and we didn't want to subject the cast and crew to going out in the absolute middle of nowhere and everyone suffering like the characters are suffering. So Shasta really turned out to be kind of the perfect place for that, where again, I grew up backpacking, and I grew up backpacking up in the Sierras where there's real forests, and now I live in LA where there are not real forests. And so it's partly a nostalgia thing for me, and then partly we're capturing this space that is sort of between life and death, and I wanted to make sure that we really had this sense of grandeur. Of the script is written very much as it's this like ancient place and stuff like that. And I wanted to try and capture some measure of that, and Shasta was just perfect for it.
And in terms of like coming up with I'm thinking about like the post process and coming up with the look for the film, the color grading, and then there's so many quiet moments in the film, but then the sound design kind of grabs you, and kind of jolts you out of your seat, makes you pay attention. Can you kind of talk about your process during post-production and what that looked like, and also whether James and Lisa were kind of watching things and giving notes as you went along, or did you two just kind of see the finished product when it was finished?
Well, why don't you guys speak to that part and I'll go back?
Was on the edge of my seat for months. Yeah, we just saw it last Saturday for the very first time.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. It was a very closed door process. So I had the fortune of having two editors, which is wonderful. It's a great way to work, because when you have three people in the edit room making decisions, you really have the opportunity to like work with the source material, find out what's working, find out what isn't, and guide the story from there. I'm a big fan of the sort of three tellings story, or the three tellings read of filmmaking, where a film is a story told three times. It's written once, it's captured in production, and then it's told in post-production. And that really is a retelling process. So for us, there's plenty of scenes that like the orders changed or things moved around. And so the actual edit process was really a writing process as well. And so as far as bringing it back to sound design and, that sort of mood and tone, I knew that I really wanted to make this as a survival story. When it's just survival and that's it, you're a little bit limited, but obviously we were going beyond that. We're digging into things like trauma, and that really opened up the possibility of shaping the sound design around somebody's internal turmoil instead of just the external. And so that really freed us up to do some interesting and creative things, to, have a moment, all these moments where she's seeing bits and pieces of her past, and how we were able to craft these little sound design moments that really hit you, that, a normal survival film maybe wouldn't have the opportunity to. So
Yeah, we didn't even ADR. That's how good the post process.
Yeah. I was surprised. We thought we were going to need ADR. We were really, really debating it. And then our sound designer, Oliver Boone, he did some absolute magic on some dialogue recovery. But and also props to David Menard, who was our on-set sound person. I mean, the fact that we don't need ADR is a huge credit to him. So
Yeah, truly.
And are there any things that kind of come to mind that happened during the filming of the production that kind of you recall as like, oh boy, that was a challenge. I'm glad we got through it, or
the rain,
Yeah.
the various rain moments.
how often?
Yes,
Yeah. What time
Our
of the year
great
were you filming in
supporting
September?
character.
we filmed in June.
Oh, in June. Yeah. It
Yeah,
can be a
June
little
was
rough up there.
yeah. I mean, it was by all of the weather reports and stuff ahead of time. It was supposed to be relatively dry, and then there was a storm that came in and dumped on us a couple of times. And because we had 11 days in the woods, and that wasn't going to change, we had to get the film in those 11 days. We ended up sort of shaping some of the scenes to the weather. And so there's a scene where they've started trying to move along. It's starting to rain, and Ford's actually starting to get kind of flustered for the first time. We've seen him as this really pleasant, cheery, come with me kind of character, and he's really starting to get frustrated. And they're setting up the tent, and Irving's trying to engage with him. And that whole scene and all of the reveals about her daughter Nori and everything was going to happen outside, but it was pouring rain. And so we decided to move a good chunk of that scene into the tent. And it was kind of a production fix, but then I realized, I was like, wait a second, this is actually a moment, or this is a way to make this scene much closer and more intimate. And so we rolled with it, and it completely changed the scene. It completely changed how it was all shot. But in the end, the actual end product was so much better because it's this really delicate moment where the two of them are in the tent. They're sheltered from everything that's going on outside, and they have this kind of safe moment to open up to one another. And it ended up being like it was a more profound and better delivered moment, because we rolled with the rain. And so that ended up like there was no rain written into the film, yet that was kind of a arc of it starting to rain that whole moment, and then the next morning we captured the rainbow and stuff like that, and managed to make it its own beat, even though it was never planned for.
Yeah, that one was a beautiful moment. And then also one that I feel like the rain added to the story is when um Ford and Irving, they've reached a dead end.
Yeah.
And it was pouring rain. Did not plan for it, but it felt like since all of this is happening in Irving's subconscious, it felt like it couldn't be more perfect. That it's pouring rain, a little bit of all hope is lost. And then as soon as they start fording that river with their new plan, this new hope, the sun is coming up and the rain is stopping.
Yeah.
So well played, Mother Nature.
Yeah. And that's a big part of that. Again, editing is writing. And so we would have a moment like that where it's clearly raining in this scene, the next scene it's not raining, and we realized we could build some space in between where the weather does change, and for that to thematically connect to the movie and their journey, it really came together.
Yeah.
I have a couple
Well, thank
tree
you.
stories, but I don't know if I'm allowed to tell them.
Oh. I'm so curious. Go for it.
I mean, Lisa, are you okay with the tree story?
Oh! Go for it.
Okay. So this is day 0 of our basically 11-day shoot up in Shasta. And I mean, it's very reflective, I think, of our dynamic, but we got on into our Airbnb, our rental house, and it was, gorgeous. Like literally the backyard opens up into the forest. And so Lisa and I are like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Let's explore and look around. And Lisa, being the adventurer that she is, decided to climb a tree. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea, so I'm just gonna hover. I was gonna hover a little bit. And yeah, the first holding she grabs onto, I guess, was not a sturdy holding. No one could have known. I definitely wouldn't have
The
known.
branch snapped.
So the first branch she grabs onto and puts weight on snaps and sends her tumbling backwards. And luckily I'm right behind her and managed to catch her. And nary but a little scrape, I think, came out of that. And we were both like, we're not gonna I don't
No
know if
more
you tell
climbing trees this trip. Yeah.
Yeah, that could have been a rough day one.
Yeah, but luckily everything
That's
went great.
that's perfect for kind of building that sense of trust and solidarity amongst the two characters, right? It's pretty serendipitous.
Involuntary
Method
Uh,
trust
actors
fall.
through and through.
yeah, you're right. Lisa, I assume that that's what your intention was in
Yeah.
grabbing onto that
Exactly.
branch. Right. Yeah, yeah.
Actually,
It's very
that was a
forward-thinking.
trust fall. Very
Yeah.
planned out trust fall. Sorry,
Right,
James,
yeah.
like that.
I passed with flying colors, I guess.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Well done. Well done. That's good scene work. Well, thank you so much for bringing this film to San Francisco and for sharing it with the SF Indie Fest audience. And we really appreciate it. And just in terms of how people can help spread the word, do you have anything that people can do to kind of help make sure that people get the chance to check this out?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to todiealonefilm.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. There's trailers, clips, all kinds of stuff people will be able to share. And yeah, just tell your friends and review us on Letterboxd. We have our Letterboxd up and running. That's very exciting. So yeah, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear back.
Friends,
That's
family,
good.
even enemies. Even tell your enemies.
Yes,
Tell everyone.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's important to keep a comprehensive and up-to-date enemies list that you're emailing all the time with film recommendations.
Very much so.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you
so much.
All right. I'll just sign off here.